Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Newcastle University interview preparation session. We're going to be covering all the medical sciences subjects at Newcastle that interview. I'm joined by my colleague Kira. Kira's mainly going to be monitoring the Q&A. So on Zoom, you'll see that there is a Q&A function. Throughout the talk, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the Q&A. We'll also leave about 10 minutes at the end so we can answer any questions then. But like I say, throughout the session, if you do have any questions, do drop them in that Q&A box. And Kira should hopefully be able to get back to you. And if not, we'll come back to them at the end. I'll make a start now. Just a note to say as well, if you just keep your cameras off and your microphones off, that just helps with bandwidth. So that would be great. Thank you. So today we're going to cover the different types of interview, what interviewers are looking for, and how to prepare best for your interview. A disclaimer, although most of this advice will be useful for applicants applying to all medical and dental schools, the detail involved is specific to Newcastle University. Each university will have their own interview policy, and that'll be usually available on their website. So if you do have any like questions or want to know anything more about different universities' types of interview, definitely check their websites because it should be available on there. But we are going to cover the different interviews at Newcastle, the different types of interview, and also the different subjects at interview. We will start with medicine, and we'll just have a quick run through the new medicine admissions policy to begin with. So the new admissions policy, this is for A100 applicants and it's home students only. So it doesn't include the A101, which is the graduate entry, and it is only home students as well that we're looking at here. So basically, the new admissions policy is offers are based on 50% academic score and 50% interview score. The first stage of the admissions policy is the academic screening. So this is scored out of 40 for your most recently achieved grades. On the table on the right, you'll be able to see what different GCSE grades are worth, how many points in our system that they are worth. For a lot of people, your most recently achieved grades will be your GCSEs if you're at sixth form or college, for example. For some of you on the call, your most recently achieved grades might be your A levels or they might be a degree even. They are worth different points. So if you are wondering how many points your specific grades are worth, do look on our website at our medicine admissions policy. There's a document on our website. And if you scroll through it, you'll be able to see the different point system for each different grade, depending on if you're doing GCSEs, A levels, or you already have a degree. We'll then look at your UCAT, and your UCAT will be scored out of 60. Again, on the table on the right, the bottom table, you'll be able to see how many points that's worth, the different UCAT scores. So for example, if the score is over 3,200, that's going to be the maximum of 60 points with our system. So your most recently achieved grades are worth a maximum of 40 points, I should say, and the UCAT's worth a maximum of 60 points. That means your academic score is worth a maximum of 100 points, and the top 1,000 are then invited to interview, and 342 places are then offered based on that 50% academic screening score and 50% your interview score. So that's just a bit of context on our new admissions policy. But the interview process for medicine, you will be invited to interview. Interview invitations are sent out between November and December. We do receive a high number of applications, and a late interview doesn't mean that you're a worse applicant. It just means that our admissions staff are just working through a high volume of applications. So that might be why yours is seen a bit later. So that's why you might receive your interview invitation a slightly bit later. You'll then attend the interview. The interviews will take place between December to February. Your interview slot will either be on a morning or afternoon. Do make sure that you're available for that interview date. Then there'll be the interview selection. So during the interview, your interviewer will be assessing you on the spot. So they'll have an iPad and they'll be able to score the applicant and write any relevant comments on that iPad whilst the interview's going on. The applicants are scored and then the scores are compared. You'll then receive an interview outcome. At this point, personal statements are checked. High scoring applicants are offered a place based on that 50% academic screening score and 50% interview score, and then offers are sent out in March. You'll then receive your A-level grades and go to university. But do remember that this process is different for every university, so do check those different university websites. If you've got interviews with other universities, I would recommend checking their different interview process and admissions processes. Obviously, that was quite a lot of information I've bombarded you then. So we do have a really nice YouTube video about that application process for UK students applying to our A100 programme. So you can scan that QR code to find out a bit more. I will circulate these slides after, so you can just watch it afterwards if you like. So what I want you to do to begin with, you don't need to like speak it out loud or anything, but just want you to assess on how prepared you feel for your interview right at this moment, with 1 being not confident at all, with 10 being fully ready. Hopefully at the end of this session, you'll be a bit higher up on the scale than you were earlier. But I do want to caveat that with, I don't think anyone ever feels like a 10, ever feels fully ready. It is natural to feel really nervous for an interview and have a bit of those doubts. So hopefully we will get you higher up in the scale at the end of this session. So just to run through the different types of interview, we have multiple mini interviews. They're often called MMIs, and we have traditional interviews. With multiple mini interviews at Newcastle, there's 7 stations. They're all 7 minutes long, and you get a 2-minute break between each station. It may include a role play station, and there'll be different interviewers at each station. This is different from a traditional interview, which is more around the 20-minute mark, and you'll have the same interview panel throughout. If other universities use that multiple mini interview technique, it may be that they have different duration times per station. They might have more stations, for example. You might get a longer or shorter break between stations. So like I say, do check those different university websites to see the difference between their interview policies. So these are the different subjects, the different medical sciences subjects at Newcastle that we interview for, and you can see which type of subjects uses the interview technique. So medicine for home students, we use multiple mini interviews. Traditional interviews are used for dentistry, pharmacy, and dietetics. And dentistry, pharmacy, and dietetics are all virtual interviews, whereas multiple mini interviews are held in person on our campus. So just some tips for virtual interviews. Do test your digital setup before doing your interview. It is really good to check the equipment and check your connection with a friend, for example. If you don't feel like you have an appropriate setup at home, you can speak to your teachers and see if you can interview at your school or college. Have a working webcam and microphone. It can be on a mobile. You don't actually need a laptop or desktop. So if it is more convenient for you to use a mobile phone, you can do that. Try to arrange a quiet and private space where you won't be disturbed. This could even be at school or college, for example. Things do go wrong and don't worry about it. I know that's easier said than done, but you won't be penalised if you have connection issues or disruption. We're not assessing you on your Wi-Fi connectivity, so don't worry if stuff does go wrong. The interviewer will completely understand and these things happen. And if the timing doesn't suit you, you can contact the university on your interview emails. You'll see that there should be an email address that you can contact with any queries. So do contact them if you have any questions or issues, and they will help to ensure you get the right interview slot for you. So you are being assessed on the content, not your camera quality or background. So again, don't worry about these aspects. Obviously, do try and have an appropriate camera background, so you can just blur it, for example, or just have a blank space behind you. if you have just been on Zoom, for example, with your friends and you've done like a quiz or something and you have a bit of a funky background, do try and change that and log on earlier before the interview. So we'll start with medicine interviews. So the areas you'll be assessed on are integrity, communication, empathy and self-awareness, motivation and commitment to being a doctor, persistence and resilience, teamwork, including leadership and personal organisation. So these are the 7 competencies and skills that you're going to be assessed on during that multiple mini interview. So the way that we interview is the MMIs. Most medical schools do interview this way now, however, some may not. So do check their websites if you've got interviews at different universities to see how they interview. There's usually around 7 to 12 stations. At Newcastle, we have 7 stations, 7 candidates per time, and 7 minutes at each station, with that 2-minute break in between. It's a carousel basis, so once you've moved on from that station, you'll have that 2-minute break, and then you'll move on to the next station. The format of questions are typically quite normal, standard questions. For example, tell me a time that you've worked in a team. You might have a role play or scenario-based question. At Newcastle, you will. This isn't to say that you need to act. We're not assessing you on any acting skills. What will happen is you'll be given a scenario and we'll ask you how you would respond to that scenario. So you're not role playing as anyone else, you're not acting, you're being yourself and you're answering how you would react to that scenario that you're given. In other universities, they may have stations with manual dexterity tests and maths tests. We don't at Newcastle, but like I say, do check those different universities if you have different interviews. The interviews are typically held between December and February. What I think is a really good plus point about an MMI is that you have those 7 stations and you have a different interviewer at each station. So, for example, if you're quite nervous on the first station and you perhaps don't answer as best as you think you could, you'll have that 2-minute break and then you'll be with a new interviewer at the next station and they don't know what you've said to the interviewer before. So you get like 7 opportunities to make that really good first impression. Obviously, you only do get 7 minutes at each station, which isn't really that long of a time. But especially for becoming a doctor, that's really good skill to have, is building that rapport with someone really quickly. So it could be a really good test in that way as well. And like I said before, remember this does differ for each university. So if you've got interviews elsewhere, do check their websites. So just an overview on dentistry now and how we interview for dentistry at Newcastle. The areas you'll be assessed on will be preparation and motivation for dental school, effective learning skills, team working, personal qualities and resilience, interpersonal and communication skills, and empathy, sensitivity, integrity, and professionalism. So for dentistry at Newcastle, we use that traditional panel interview. This will be conducted by 2 admission selectors from the School of Dental Sciences. It'll last approximately 20 minutes. They can be held in person or online. This year at Newcastle, we're holding all dentistry interviews online, and interviews will be held in March. So a good plus point for the traditional panel interviews is it is a much more of a familiar format of interview. So it's quite a standard sort of the normal interview that you might think of. You will have 20 minutes as well for your interview, so it gives you plenty of time to build that rapport with the interviewers. And again, this may differ for each university. So next subject we'll look at is pharmacy and how we interview for pharmacy at Newcastle. So the areas you'll be assessed on will be your personal statement, your motivation to study pharmacy, and your values. Again, it's a traditional interview, a traditional panel interview. This will be conducted by 2 selectors. One will be an academic at the university and the other will be a current student on the MPharm course. It is quite conversational and our panel will want to get to know you and why you want to study pharmacy. The interview will cover questions such as a time that you've shown leadership, a time you've worked in a team, when you've communicated effectively, or when you've successfully dealt with a difficult situation. It'll be approximately 15 minutes long and it will be held online. And at this interview, the selectors will have your personal statement in front of them. You can print off a version of your personal statement as well and have that in front of you if you like, if that helps you. And the interviews are held from October, so they're ongoing now and they will be held until March. The final subject we interview for in our medical sciences courses is dietetics. And the areas you'll be assessed on for dietetics are integrity, communication, empathy and self-awareness, compatibility with the M-Diet program, motivation and commitment to being a dietitian, persistence and resilience, teamwork, including leadership and personal organisation. Again, a traditional panel interview that is held online. It'll be conducted by two selectors. They can be a mixture of NHS dietitians, university staff, researchers, intercalated medical students, and lay people from all walks of life. So it's quite a diverse range of selectors for the dietetics interviews. It'll be approximately 30 minutes long, and there will be a task element that you'll be emailed prior to your interview. Again, they're held online and they'll be held between February and March. So a big thing that you want to do for every interview, for every subject, whether that be medicine, dentistry, dietetics, or pharmacy, is reflecting on your experiences. So what we expect is we expect applicants to be able to reflect on their experiences, thinking about what they've learned, any skills that they may have gained, and relating this back to your chosen subject. To prepare, you can reflect on a particular experience that you already have and think about the skills that you might have gained from this. So you can see this flow chart below, and I would recommend doing this after this session and before your interview as preparation, is to think about a particular experience. For example, below you can see this experience is volunteering in a classroom. Extract all the different skills that you've learned from volunteering in a classroom. So that's empathy, communication, commitment, organisation, and resilience. You then want to relate each skill to your chosen subject. And then you want to, and that's what you want to be talking about in your interview. So you might get a bit fed up of me this evening of saying the words, relating it to each skill to your chosen subject, but that's something that's really important, whether that be for any of the subjects, medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, or dietetics. You want to think about those experiences you've learned, but the main thing you want to do is relating it to medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, or dietetics. A different way that you can do this is, rather than thinking about a particular experience, is you could instead look at a specific skill and then reflect on the experiences that you have that fit that skill. So you can see the skills in the circles above, but if we take empathy, for example, you could then use the example of volunteering at a local care home. You would then be able to extract that it's important to empathise with patients and understand their worries and concerns, and how to relate this back to your subject. For example, how to relate this back to medicine. This is often the case with upset and worried family members or patients themselves during a vulnerable time. So there's a couple of different ways that you can reflect. You can either look at those experiences and extract the skills learned from your experiences, or you can look at the skills and extract what experiences you have that fit those skills. But I definitely recommend doing that before your interview and just have a bank of different examples that you can draw upon during your interview. During the interview, a really nice technique is called the STAR technique. You may already be familiar with this, but it's a really good way that you can structure your answer during interview. So the STAR technique stands for situation, task, action, and result. So situation, you want to set the scene and provide some context. For example, where did this example happen and when? Task, you want to describe the purpose, what needed to be done and why. Action, you want to say how you did it, what skills did you use. And result, you want to explain the result and accomplishment, recognition and savings. So it is just a suggested structure. It does allow you to speak quite clearly about your experiences and reflect on what you've learned from it. I would argue that you could potentially add a couple more R's on there. So you might want to add another R in reflection. So reflect on what you did, what went well, what you could have changed. And relate, you want to relate that to your chosen subject and why that's important and what you've learned from that, and that's importance, for example, to medicine. You don't want to pre-prepare answers and to questions word for word. It is quite obvious when people do this. It does sound quite robotic, and the interviewers can sort of get a gist of when this happens. You want it to sound as natural and flowing as possible, your answers, and you want to be quite enthusiastic, and that's quite hard to get across if you prepare an answer word for word. So it's obviously fine to have that bank of different experiences and skills that you've learned and how they fit with different competencies and different skills, but I wouldn't pre-prepare an answer word for word. You also don't know what questions you're going to be asked. So if you get asked a different question to one that you've pre-prepared for, this could really throw you off, and that can be quite a stressful situation to be in. So just to give you guys an example of the STAR technique, we'll look through an example answer for a question on teamwork. So the situation, throughout school, I played netball as a team sport and was elected captain. The task was that this gave me the opportunity to develop my leadership and organizational and teamwork and skills, as I was given a lot more responsibility due to being in charge of a team. Action, I had to use teamwork and skills to get the team to play to the best of their ability. In order to win the difficult matches, encouraging and communicating efficiently was essential. The result was my team won every match during the season apart from one, which highlighted how proficient our teamwork and skills had become. And again, you can add them other two R's on reflection on what went well and what you could have changed, and relating. And relating is the kind of key one in this whole scenario. You want to relate that into why it would make you a good doctor, dentist, dietitian, or pharmacist. So just with the next few slides, I'm going to show you guys a few practice interview questions. So some like tasters of what you can expect during your interview. I will circulate these slides afterwards. And I do think it's a really good idea to have a look through these and perhaps just sort of draft an example answer in your head. Again, don't necessarily pre-prepare word for word, but you can think of different examples and skills that you could draw for each question. You could also perhaps get your parent or guardian or friend or teacher to practice these with you. I do think that is really helpful. Later on, we're going to look through a couple of videos, both on medicine and dentistry, and from our current students, and some tips that they have. And one of the tips that a medicine student has, which I think is a really nice tip, is that they used to get their mum to just randomly spring a question on them throughout the day from a bank of questions that they had. And then they would time them for like 7 minutes to answer it, if obviously for medicine, if you're doing the MMIs. I think that's a really good idea that you could maybe use as well, because it kind of puts you on the spot, and it's getting you that really good practice in for your interview. So just next few slides, we'll show you a few of them example questions. So for the first one is, tell me why you want to be a doctor, dentist, pharmacist, or dietitian. For our communication, empathy, and self-awareness competency, the kinds of questions you can expect are, do you think you are a good communicator? Please give me an example. Why is it important to be empathetic towards your patients? What is your biggest weakness? And what would be your greatest strength and why? For motivation and commitment to being a doctor and dentist, the kinds of questions you can expect are, can you tell me what you have done to find out more about the medicine, dental program, the career? What do you think you would find most challenging about being a doctor, dentist, pharmacist, dietitian? Have you ever had to care for someone, and what do you think makes a good doctor, dentist, and so on? For the question on compatibility with the program, can you tell me why you've applied to study medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, or dietetics at Newcastle? So, particular for this question, you want to do a bit of research for the university that you're applying for. You want to really read up on their different admissions policies. If you look on the website, you'll be able to find a load of like information about the course. So, depending on the university that you're interviewing for, you really want to read up on their program, and this is when you can really show that you have done that. Do you know what sorts of learning styles suit you best? Can you give me an example of how you like to learn, and how do you think the curriculum design suits your learning style? So for the competency of teamwork, kind of questions you can expect are you part of any teams? Can you tell me about your role in that team? Can you tell me about a time when you had to lead a team? Can you tell me about a time when you had to follow? Can you give me an example of a time that you've worked in a team and it was successful? And alternatively, can you give me an example of a time you worked in a team and it was not successful? For the personal organisation competency, the kinds of questions you can expect are, can you give me an example of when you had lots of deadlines and how did you prioritise them? How would you balance your social and outside interests with a medicine or dental, pharmacy, dietetics degree? And how do you balance your time? For persistence and resilience, have you ever failed at anything? What was it and how did that make you feel? Do you find it easy to ask for help? Give me an example. And what do you think will be your greatest challenge in completing medical or dental school, for example, or becoming a doctor, dentist, pharmacist, or dietitian? For integrity, we're looking a lot more on medical ethics. So the kinds of questions you can expect are, have you seen any media stories involving ethics which caught your attention? Can you talk me through it? How do you deal with making mistakes? Can you give me an example? How do you feel about apologizing to someone? Have you got an example? What do you understand about euthanasia? Do you agree with abortion? And what does patient confidentiality mean? So this competency in particular is a bit more of a difficult one to answer, I think. Compared to the likes of teamwork, they are usually quite standard sort of questions and answers that you'll be used to. Integrity does involve a lot more of like that medical ethics subjects. And what I would recommend to do for this skill in particular is to read up on current medical ethics storylines in the news at the moment. Do be aware of the source that you're using. For example, you can use the news, for example, you can like watch the news, read up on articles, but do just be wary on the articles that you're reading. And for example, if they're, oh, sorry, I went back one, I went forward one. If they're a trustworthy news source, or if they're perhaps not as trustworthy, or perhaps they're biased. So it's really just being quite aware of that bias that someone may have when you're reading their articles, for example. But a good way to keep on top of like different medical ethics is reading the news and watching the news, listening to podcasts, reading articles, stuff like that. There's plenty of like documentaries on the telly as well that you can catch up on. So I would definitely recommend to do that. The next station that you would have, and this really just applies for medicine, is the role play station. And this is the kinds of questions you can expect to receive. So obviously it's called role play, but like I mentioned before, we're not going to expect you to act. We're not going to expect you to be someone else. What we want is you to answer the question as yourself. So, for example, you are working in a very busy A&E department. A patient has been triaged and has now been waiting for 3 hours with a broken nail and potentially a broken finger. The patient, Karen, is upset with how long they've had to wait and is now getting restless. And then we would ask you how you would respond to that. So we're not asking you to be anyone else. We're just giving you a scenario and asking how you would respond to that scenario. Another example of a role play question is you are working as a receptionist at a busy GP surgery. A patient has missed an appointment and would like to schedule another. The need for an appointment is not an emergency and the next available appointment is 1 week away. The patient is unhappy that they have to wait that long. So again, just answering it as yourself, how you would answer, rather than acting as anyone else. I know role play can sound a bit daunting because that's what you sort of initially think of is acting, but we're not asking that. You're just going to be presented with the scenario and we want you to respond how you would respond to that scenario best. So hopefully now, if we look at this scale again, you're hopefully feeling a bit more prepared for your interview than you did a bit earlier on when I asked. Again, not everyone always does feel fully ready, and that is completely normal. It's a very nerve-wracking situation to have an interview. So don't worry if you don't feel fully ready, but hopefully you do feel a bit more prepared. We will have a bit of time at the end for questions. I'm not quite finished the session yet as well, so we'll have a couple of videos on interview tips from current students for both medicine and dentistry, and I'll leave you with some final tips and advice before we move on to your questions that you may have. So the first video I'm going to show you is for medicine and how to prepare for your medicine interviews by our current medical students.
Medical schools across the UK interview their candidates before offers are given out. A lot of the time interviewers are looking for things like communication skills, integrity, teamwork and suitability to the MBBS course.
It can be a really daunting time in the medical school entry process, so congratulations to those that have an interview lined up, and if you're still waiting to hear back, try not to worry too much.
Medical school interviews at Newcastle University involve an MMI format. This stands for multiple mini interview. What this entails is you'd have lots of little interview stations, each lasting for about 7 minutes. One of them will be a role-playing station, but you won't be tested on any actual medical knowledge.
Kind of like speed dating, in that you rotate around stations with different interviewers, where they ask different questions and assess sort of individually different components. And so I think this is quite a good way of doing it. It means you can start afresh with each station, which is always good.
Before my medical school interview, I made sure to do my research. I made sure to find out what style of interview I would be having at Newcastle University. Like I said before, it usually is MMI, but other universities might do panel interview, so make sure you double check the format.
Because I was classed as an international student, I did what was called a panel interview, and that basically involved me having a discussion with 2 members from the Faculty of Medical Sciences and just answering some of the questions that they had.
Dress appropriately for your medicine interview. Make sure you're wearing something that you would feel comfortable having a job interview in.
A few weeks leading up to my interviews, I started spending some time online on student forums and sort of just watching videos of past student experiences to get an idea of what type of things I could expect to be asked during my interview. I used a lot of different online resources. Some really good ones that I recommend include MedicMind and MedicPortal.
I found practice questions on websites like the Medic Portal, which have individual sections for each UK university, and the interview questions that usually come up. It's important not to over-prepare the questions. You don't want it to sound rehearsed like a script. The interviewers are looking for you to be natural and to speak what you think.
Sometimes I would rehearse my answers in front of the mirror just to feel confident and sort of comfortable answering the questions.
I also then got my mum to ask me questions every night, and it didn't matter what the question was, even if it was really hard and I didn't have an answer. It was good to be put in that position, so you're just sort of preparing yourself mentally for that feeling of, oh, I'm not sure what I'm going to say next.
Another top tip I have is to make sure you research some ethical information. Places like the Medical Schools Council webpage or the General Medical Council's webpage can give information into things like the ethical pillars of medicine, which you can apply to ethical scenarios at interview.
I was actually really pleasantly surprised because it was a really comfortable environment, and both of those members of staff did a really good job at making it feel more like a conversation rather than an interview.
At Newcastle, they tend to provide a sort of structure or template or a bit of guidance on what kinds of questions you can be asked, and they typically tend to be things like why this university, why this medical school, why medicine in general, how have you demonstrated teamwork, leadership, communication skills.
During my interview, I was asked quite a lot of questions about why Newcastle University specifically. I made sure to have knowledge of the city and the university and what happened on Newcastle University's MBBS course. You want to show the interviewer that you not only like the university but also the city as well.
The other thing that I spoke about is the fact that in your clinical years you can be placed in different base units. So for example, right now I spend a lot of my time being placed in Durham, and in my interview I spoke a little bit about the fact that being placed in these different areas would expose me to sort of a wide patient demographic, and I would find this quite helpful for my clinical learning.
Make sure that you're also looking at any possible medical stories in the news that are happening at the time of your interview. It means that you can apply this to any questions that they give you.
The other thing I was asked is what I sort of learned and gained from my work experience that I had done, regardless of whether that was sort of hospital-based or in the community.
And when you're talking through these examples, make sure you've got another one in the back of your mind, just in case the interviewer says, oh, can you give me another example as well?
I would be lying if I said I wasn't the slightest bit anxious before my interview, and it's important to remember that those feelings are completely normal and valid. So feeling anxious, worried, or stressed, that's completely normal. Going into your interview sort of very calm, relaxed, and confident is so important because it sort of sets up the stage for you to be able to show off your abilities and what you have to offer to the university.
What I would say is to remind yourself that everyone's in the same boat, everyone feels the exact same, and you can only try your best.
It's perfectly fine to say, oh, can I just take a couple of seconds? I'm just going to think through things. And I think as well, if you feel like you've given a bit of a poor response, saying, oh, can I do that again? I don't think that was my best. Am I okay to give that another go? They want you to perform at your best. You know, they're on your side. So just try and take your time and think through things. So how did I feel after the interview? Well, for the most part, relieved. I think to have another one down. I think it's very easy to fixate on the tiny little things that didn't quite go to plan and forget that on the whole you performed really well. So just try and keep that in mind, particularly when you're waiting to hear if you've got an offer.
One of my biggest tips would be to try not to predict the outcome of the interview, just because it can take quite a while for you to get your results back. So for me, it took a few weeks to find out if I was successful or not. That time period can be quite worrying just because different universities will tell their outcomes at different points, and if you've done an interview at the same time as a friend, they might find out a little bit sooner or a little bit later.
Best of luck for your medical school interviews at Newcastle University. Hopefully see you at the university soon.
Okay, brilliant. So hopefully you got some really good tips and advice there from our current medicine students. They did give examples of a few resources that they liked. So after this, I will circulate all the slides and I'll put a link to the videos used in the slides as well, if you ever want to watch them back. But our next interview that we will, our next video that we will look at is the dentistry course and how to prepare for your dental school interview for Newcastle.
Hi, I'm Noor and I'm a first year dental student at Newcastle University.
Hi, my name is Sana and I'm a dental therapy student at Newcastle University.
The format of the interview, at least for dentistry, was a traditional panel interview where I had two interviewers on the opposite side of the table, just asking me some basic questions about my experiences and why I wanted to do dentistry.
One of the examiners will ask you the questions and the other one will write down your responses.
In terms of the types of questions I was asked, it was mainly to do with my motivation behind doing dentistry, as well as why I chose Newcastle, and some basic questions for my personal statement. In terms of how I felt before the interview, I was of course quite nervous like everyone else is. It's totally normal to feel nervous before an interview, but I knew the outcome of this interview would determine where I spend the next 5 years. But to manage my nerves, I made sure to get to the interview nice and early. I made sure to talk with all the people in the interview room just to get me in the mood of talking to new people, so it's not a shock when you go into that interview room and see the interviews for the first time. After the interview, I thought I did pretty well. I was so glad it was all over. The interviewers were really nice, they were super friendly, and I found out that I was successful in the interview around 6 weeks after the interview, which is when most people in my cohort found out.
My first top tip would be to research beforehand. So by this, I mean read some blogs about dentistry, maybe listen to an Oral Health Foundation podcast. This will help you to get an idea of any of the challenges facing dental therapists and the technologies that they're currently using in their practice. And it just gives you something to talk about in an interview. So I would also look at the 9 principles set out by the GDC. Again, it's very impressive if you're able to quote these in your answers.
Make sure you do a lot of practice and do a lot of mock interviews with friends and family. And if you know any medical or dental students, make sure to practice with them. They can really offer you a lot of advice on how they prepared for their interview and what to do, what not to do in an interview. Also did a lot of reflection on my work experience, and did a lot of reflection on my extracurricular activities, and linked them to dentistry in the interview to show how my extracurricular activities would make me a successful dental student.
My second top tip then would be to have a great example of teamwork under your belt. So they will probably ask you about a situation in which you've been in a team. They'll probably ask you about the challenges you faced and how you overcome them. So make sure you have a good example.
Another top tip I'd give is to record yourself answering different interview questions and watch it back. See where you struggle, see where you perform best, and see where you can improve over when you're answering different questions.
My third top tip would be to research about the university that you're applying to. So in the case of Newcastle, make sure you have a reason for why you picked Newcastle over other universities. This is important so if they ask you the question, you're not stumped.
And my third top tip for preparing for your interview would be to plan your journey ahead and make sure you get to the interview venue nice and early. The last thing you want to do is be late to an interview where you're already stressed and nervous, and just having your journey planned out well before the interview makes it a much less stressful and nervous experience.
And my fourth top tip would be to be confident. So during your interview, make sure that you're maintaining eye contact with the examiner. This shows that you're confident not only in the response that you're giving, but also that you're listening to what they're saying. Listening and being confident are 2 really important qualities for dental therapists. So make sure that you can show this in your interview. And be excited. Show them that you want to study at Newcastle University and that you're excited to study dental therapy. I wish you all the best of luck, and I hope to see you in Newcastle soon.
So again, hopefully you guys found that useful. Just want to say on that last top tip from Noah about planning your journey. Obviously with dentistry this year, they're online. When they would have applied, they must have been in person. So obviously for like the medicine people on the call, the people it is a good tip to sort of plan your journey and plan your route to the interview, but dentistry and all other subjects like pharmacy and dietetics are online this year. So just to finish off before we go to your guys' questions, is a really important thing to do, which is easier said than done, but is to stay calm in your interview. The interviewers are there to get the best out of you. They're on your side. They may ask you extra questions to get the most out of your answer. So don't worry if they are asking you more questions. They just want to help you get the most of your answer. You may answer everything that the interviewer needs to know quite quickly, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could mean that you've given quite a concise answer. But however, longer answers can also be great if you think that you can talk about an experience and skill in more detail and you've got more to say. This also isn't an issue. It is okay to take a breather and think about your answer, or ask the interviewer to rephrase their question, if you don't understand. I think James, in the top tip he gave, was that it's okay to tell the interviewer if you, oh, sorry, can I rephrase that, or can I start that again? So if you don't think that you've given your best answer, you can rephrase, or if you don't think that you understand what the interviewer's asked of you, you can ask them to rephrase. Think about your body language, your tone of voice, and speaking clearly. You want to speak quite clearly. You don't want to mumble or speak too fast. You can introduce yourself when going into the interview. You don't need to like shake their hand or anything if you don't feel comfortable, but it is good to introduce yourself, and that can put you at a bit of ease as well. And try not to stress that the interviewer is taking up too much time. The interviewer does know the time constraints of the session, and they'll only be asking you questions or talking about relevant things to get the most out of you. So some top tips is to reflect on those skills that you've learned through hobbies or work experience, part-time jobs, and how these relate to medicine, dentistry, and that should also say pharmacy and dietetics if you have an interview for one of those subjects. Do read through your personal statement, as you may be asked about it at interview. In particular for pharmacy, you will be asked about it at interview, so just bear that in mind. For medicine, you won't be asked at an interview. Your personal statements aren't checked until after the interview, but for pharmacy, it will be asked about at interview. And for the other subjects, it may. So do just sort of read through it and have a little look at the different things that you put in there. And for pharmacy in particular, if you did want to have a printout with you on the call, you can do. Read up on those different medical and dental issues and ethics, and be quite aware of what's going on in the news at the moment. Try not to sound too over-rehearsed or robotic. It's really obvious when you do. So just you want to have that nice flowing conversational like tone. Listen to the question and fully prepare and ask what is answered. Sorry, I've said that the wrong way. Listen to the question and fully answer what is asked of you, as opposed to a question that you might have pre-rehearsed for. When I showed you earlier on the different kinds of questions that you can be asked, under one skill or one competency, you can see there's quite a range of different questions that can be asked. So you don't want to pre-prepare word for word an answer for a question, because you might not be asked it. So do just listen to the question quite carefully when the interviewer is telling you it, and fully answer what they're actually asking you, in rather than a question that you might want to have been answered. And do prepare early so that you can identify gaps that you might need more experience in. So if you do reflect on those different skills that you've learned through hobbies and work, if you start doing that as soon as possible, you can start to see those gaps and maybe start filling in those gaps. So some frequently asked questions. What should I wear? This is more for the in-person ones. You want to dress smartly and appropriately. You want to be comfortable but professional. Emily, on her top tip, said that you want to kind of dress as you would for a job interview, and I think that's a really good idea. So kind of avoid sportswear or like white trainers, for example. Will I have to act during the role play? No, the actors will introduce themselves and give you a scenario, but you will answer as yourself. What if the time is up mid-answer? Don't worry, the interviewer is aware of the time pressure. They will have been able to give you an appropriate score within the time available. So obviously you get 7 minutes for MMIs, so they will have been able to give you the appropriate score, even if you are mid-talk and once the bell goes off to move on. Who will be interviewing me? A combination of academic staff, lecturers, admissions team, healthcare staff, current medicine students, and general university staff. Like I mentioned before, I am going to circulate these slides with you all, and earlier on I did kind of give an idea of the kind of people that will be interviewing you, so you can have a look at that if you want to afterwards. Where can I put my bag and my coat? There will be a room for applicants to wait before the interview and leave belongings during the interview. Will I be asked about my personal statements? For pharmacy, you will. Others, you might not be asked, but it is kind of good idea to prepare by reading through it, for example. You might have some experiences on there that'll really help you during your interview when you're answering the questions, so it is always good to have a read through it beforehand. And should I shake hands, if you're comfortable to introduce yourself and shake their hand, do feel free to do so. So that gives us about 10 minutes now for some questions.